Welcome to the Smart to Fish Wild podcast, where we share a passion for fly fishing in the outdoors with the strategy of building a well-intentioned, meaningful life. I'm Mark Handler, Colorado native fly fisher, outdoorsman, happy father, and wealth manager. And each week I get the opportunity to sit down with some magnificent people who really know how to turn their passion into purpose and design lives that are meaningful and well-intentioned. Today, I'm speaking with John Langcuster, a television anchor and executive at State Farm. And we're going to talk about the intersection of fly fishing with a lot of other aspects of life. So sit back and enjoy. And thank you for watching Smart to Fish Wild podcast. So, John, welcome. Thanks again. And just wanted to ask a simple question. When did you develop your passion for fly fishing?
Thanks, Mark. And Mark, thanks for allowing me to be on your podcast. I've enjoyed watching your first three, and I love sharing this wonderful sport and pastime. And just thank you for creating a platform for me to be part of. But yeah, I started at a very young age. I mean, I was thinking about not too long ago. I love to write. I love to write, essays, articles, poems around, experiences, fly fishing, things like that. And I was thinking the other day, was very young when I caught my first fish. I was probably 5, 6 years old, but believe it or not, I remember a lot of that because I remember I took that small panfish and I put it in a bucket and I carried it around the neighborhood. It didn't live too long, obviously, but I remember I was so proud of that fish. But no, my father got me into fly fishing when I was about 9 years old. Dad was one of only few fly fishers in North Alabama at the time. We had mostly, warm water. We had panfish, largemouth, smallmouth bass. I also had an uncle, Barry Pace, that was just an amazing fisherman. He was big into spin fishing. Also, he was big into fly fishing. He would fish a lot of the creeks in North Alabama, and he would surprisingly catch some beautiful smallmouth, nice trophy smallmouth, and then along with some nice largemouth bass. But it was something that was different. Throughout my life, I was kind of back and forth fishing, either, bait casting, spin fishing, or fly fishing. And when I was in the television world, I did a lot of segments on fishing, and they allowed me to do that as part of a weeknight stuff that we would do. And then also we would do a segment. We did it with the gentleman over time that fly fished in Huntsville, Alabama, where I was located. And he really taught a lot of people about the sport that didn't know much about it, which eventually, Huntsville has grown so much over in the last 30, 40 years. There's a huge fly fishing club, fly tying club up there. You have the Elk River that's just across the border in Tennessee. That's a tailwater fishery. And then, believe it or not, in Alabama, you have below Smith Lake Dam fishery, the rainbow trout, actually a fly shop down there where they will stock it. So, there is fly fishing in the area, and it's kind of evolved over time. But, it's been something, as you've talked about too in your podcast. I mean, it's a connector. It brings people together. It allows us to have kind of common ground. It's a neat fraternity, sorority, if you want to call it, of people that with different backgrounds, and venues like you have here and podcasts allows us to get together and talk about our experiences and share. And that's the wonderful thing I love about it. I mean, my dad was kind enough to share that sport with me, and something that I've taken, into my 30s, where I really got into the trout fishing and the cold water, fishing. And I've fished all over the world, from Austria, Czech Republic. My heart is in the chalk streams of England, but I fished a lot of saltwater destinations as well. And I got a lot more to fish before I leave this planet. But it is a wonderful sport. And as the saying goes, trout, they do not live in ugly places. They live in beautiful places. And that's the greatest part about all of this.
Yeah, yeah. I, often it's hard to explain to people who don't have a passion for fly fishing how you can literally, in my case, go with a complete stranger up to the Bighorn River in Montana, Fort Smith, Crow Indian Reservation, and you drive 8 hours, 9 hours on the way up. You fish together for 3 days. So you're literally 3 feet apart for 12, 14 hours. And then you drive back to Denver another 8, 9 hours, and you come back. And I've literally made some numerous lifetime friends that went from complete stranger to a lifetime friend because, the experiences and the stories and talk about family and passions and dreams and tough times in life. I mean, you exchange more information on a fly fishing trip with a complete stranger than you do with your best friend over the last 5 years. Even though you go to a couple football games, a couple tailgates, a Christmas party, but you add up all the time, that you're talking to your best friend and it's like, what, 2, 3 hours a year
Oh,
versus 30,
absolutely.
40 hours with a complete stranger? It's just incredible. It's just incredible. Do you feel the
Yeah,
same way?
I feel the same way. You mentioned the Bighorn. I remember making that trip. I flew into South Dakota and I drove up the spine of Wyoming and fished the Bighorn and fished with Eric, who I've never met before. I actually saw him on a fishing show, and contacted him. And like you said, we spent several days out in the boat and just had the time of my life. But I just think about the relationships. One I'll never forget. Most recently, probably a few years back, I went to the Czech Republic. My wife and I went to Prague as part of a vacation, but I worked up a fishing trip with Olag, and he was born in Moscow. And he came and, I didn't know this guy, and he picked me up in downtown Prague, and we drove out to the countryside. And I shared with him, I said, I really want to learn about check nymphing. I want to learn how you do it over here. And we just had a absolute wonderful day in the water. And what it did, it connected us. And also to this day, I mean, we email back and forth. We'll email our catches, and he was ice fishing here, and he's actually a musician in a symphony, has a beautiful voice, just a very unique individual. But his background was so different from mine. But we connected. I mean, we were together that day, and I can just go on and on about people that I've met over time. A dear friend up in Ennis, Montana, with the tackle shop, John Way, who John was and living in upstate New York, was recruited on football to Montana, and he's become this fly shop operator, one of Orvis's top operators, the oldest fly shop in Montana. And he and I, it's like we're kinfolks, as we call it down here south. We just feel like we've known each other for years, and it's a neat bond that you create, and the learning from it too. Just what you pick up if you really love the sport like you and I do, the passion behind it. The key is, what are those little nuggets you can continue to get, so when you get on the water, you'll optimize your time and have the greatest amount of success. And that's what makes this sport so special.
Very, very well articulated. Incredible. So, do you mind sharing with us some of your experiences in the chalk creeks of England and kind of what you learned there?
Yeah, that was something that was super special. How it came about, I was living in, now I've moved all over the a good bit of the country over time with my career and job. And we were living up in Kansas City, and I had the opportunity to fish the White River and caught some beautiful fish. That's another story I think I shared with you the last time we talked. But when we moved to Mississippi, there was the World Fishing Network. I don't know if you remember that cable outlet, but it was called the World Fishing Network, and we actually had it on our cable when we moved here. And one morning, I woke up early Saturday morning, was having coffee, and I flipped to this show, and it was called the Game Fisher Diaries, and it was an English produced show by Ray Boris. And Ray, it's just a very successful fisherman, fly fisherman over in England's done multiple shows. And I started watching that show, and you talk about connections. I watched it probably about 6 weeks. It would come on, I'd record it, and I'd go back and watch. And there was a couple of episodes about the chalk streams of England, and one of them was I think was entitled "Put to the Test," and the other one was about a one fly tournament that the company Fishing Breaks and Simon Cooper would have once a year. It kind of fell off, I believe, after COVID, but you would have like a one fly. We have them up here in the States. You go over fish, but anyway, I watched those episodes, and I just got intrigued with the chalk streams. And Simon Cooper, who, like I mentioned, owns Fishing Breaks and several leases on land in England, told just a great description of how chalk stream fishing and how modern day fly fishing evolved out of that southern part of England, south of London. And there was really Frederick Halford, GEM skews, and there was also Frank Sawyer, who was responsible for the pheasant tail nymph that so many people use today, and how that kind of evolved over time. Through that show, I started emailing and connecting, and I connected with Ray, I connected with Simon, and I've had the opportunity to go over a few times to England and fish, and it's such a beautiful fishery. I mean, it's one that it's managed, and but what Simon and then Howard at Upstream Dry Fly, just two guys, for example, they've done a great job at their companies. They create these experiences for you, and you basically go out and you lease stretch a stream for a particular day. You can get a guide if you choose to do a guide. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But I've gotten so much joy because it's technical fishing at its best. But you have rainbow trout, brown trout, you have grayling, you have just this biomass of food for the fish, the insects, you know, both on top with dry flies, both, below the surface of the water with nymphs that you can fish for. But I'll have to tell you this, Mark, this summer I went back and I got to fish in Stockbridge, the Greyhound on the test. And the Greyhound is a hotel next to this incredible fly shop slash hunting shop, if you want to call it that, more of a sporting shop as we would call it in England. But Alistair Rob Chin owns a shop, and it's right next to the Greyhound, which is a hotel, and behind the Greyhound is the River Test that runs right through basically the side of that hotel down to Bossington Estate and other areas. But I finally was able to, with Upstream Dry Fly, fish it, and it was one of those things. You walk up to the hotel, and you walk into the hotel, and they give you a card, and they walk you to the gate, and you have a hut, which they'll deliver food and a pint, but then they also have it all locked up. You go in, you lock down, you have this stretch of stream for a good distance, which goes up actually to the Houghton Fish Club, which is a historical fish club. King Charles is part of that fish club that you can fish. And it was one of those things. The classic FM classical music was playing in the hut. It was a beautiful sunny day. It was just right after mayfly season, and got out there, and it was just absolutely beautiful. But it was like a dream, because you get out there and you start figuring out, you do your observation stage where you walk down the stream side, you look at where the fish are, where they're settled, what insects are hatching, and then you kind of make your decisions. Okay, this is the approach I'm going to take. And in England, it's upstream dry fly or upstream wet fly fishing. You typically do one fly. You don't use indicators. You use kind of the give and take method, but it's all about, as Halford wrote in his book, where you give the fish a sporting chance, and so you try to do it stealthy as possible. But it was just another great experience there. Caught a lot of fish, and next day caught a lot of fish at Bossington. But it's one of those areas, and I would challenge, if you would like to go there. There's a lot that you can research online and YouTube's and all that, but it's one of those, you feel like you're really walking the steps of the people that really created what we know today as fly fishing. And it really is. I mean, that's really the case. And so you get out with nature, you have pigeons and pheasants flying around, you have, the different wildlife, you have the grass that's tough around the banks to cast around, but you kind of figure all that out. But the bug life, the insect life, and just the ability to catch some of those natural brown trout, it's really special, and it's something special to me, and I plan on going back many more times before I leave this planet.
Wow. That's truly inspirational. Yeah, I was a history major in undergrad at University of Colorado Boulder, and I've got a great appreciation for history, and I've got a lot of English in my lineage, and Scottish and Irish, so I dream of going over there someday. Definitely on my bucket list. Yeah. So switching gears a little bit, if you don't mind, kind of discussing the correlation between the things you learn fly fishing and other aspects of life. Let's say fly fishing and business. What has fly fishing done for you in the intersection of those two currents of life?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's taught me patience, appreciation, and patience from, when you get on the stream, to appreciation of what's around you, when you're fishing. We have such a beautiful world here, creation that was made for us. And, walking out on a stream, no matter where you are. I mean, I love to fish. I prefer to fish the smaller streams, the Spring Creeks, the Ozarks in Missouri. I go up there a good bit. I love fishing in Virginia. There's a place called Escataba Farms, which is just a beautiful fishery. If you're ever in Virginia, Howard's Creek in West Virginia. There's just so many beautiful small streams out there, that I love just to immerse myself into when I go. I've always somewhat been kidded by people, because I remember I was in the Ozarks one time, and I was walking up the stream, and there was a lady sitting in a lawn chair just fishing, I guess, with corn or whatever. And I had on my, you know how it is, Mark. We have our full gear, you've got the packs on you. But I wear these SWAT team knee pads and shin pads because I like to. There's an advantage of getting lower in the water, especially in skinny water when you're fishing big fish. And so I came walking up and I think I had my hoodie over my head. I had my sunglasses, probably my buff around my neck. And she's like, "Who are you?" But it's one of those things that you try to stay as stealthy as you get to catch the fish. But the point I'm making with all this, I like to get in the water. That's why I like to fish the smaller streams. I mean, I fish the bighorn, the Madison from drift boats, and I do enjoy that. But immersing yourself in the water, what's around you, is something that I really enjoy, and it really gives you that opportunity to kind of pause and think. And to me personally, I'm to the point for fishing over, 50 years, the more technical and difficult the opportunity is, the more I enjoy it because, you can go all day out to an open stream and cast and, make your own cast and all that. But I love the challenges of it, of just figuring out, this new patch of water I just found. If I'm going to get a fish to the net, I've got to use angles. I've got to, and I was watching a guy on YouTube the other day that was in Iceland, and he never moved off his spot when he caught this big brown trout. And a lot of it was just how he leveraged his rod left and right and fought the fish. It's things like that that I really enjoy the most about it. But I guess it's the patience. And I do think that, I look back when I was in leadership. I did it for as long as I did. I always try my best to be a servant type leader. I think that there's, a time to lead. There's a time to manage. I remember reading books. Ken Blanchard was one that was, out there in the 90s that talked about, true leadership is creating a culture and people understanding, their role in that culture, including the leader. And also there's a way not to, and that's through management and, you coming up with the idea and kind of forcing that idea on someone and them not buying into it. And I kind of equate that to fly fishing. I mentioned Alford and Sir Isaac Walton earlier, but the Complete Angler, the book that Sir Isaac Walton wrote years ago, it was like the guide. I actually have a copy of it right here. It's pretty old, as you could tell, but the pages are really thin. But that book was like up until right before COVID. I think it was the second most read book to the Bible for years because it was just a handbook that's all that people had back then around fishing and what it meant. And it talked about a lot of the fish that were native, the chubs and pike and things like that in England. And then Halford came by and kind of codified fly fishing. And I will say this, I'm a book nerd when I come to fly fishing, but here's his book, and you can tell it's this book. But he talks insects and code, and he talks about you got to cast upstream, you got to give the fish a sporting chance. And then you had a gentleman, GEM Skews, that came back behind Halford and said, "Hey, look, there are you can catch a lot of fish on top, but there's a lot going on bottom from." And Halford recognizes too, where there is that larva, the caddis that comes out of the casing. I mean, it comes up, it makes its way up through the water column, and then it hatches. Any insect does, but there's a lot of fish eating that insect as it comes up to hatch, and let's say a mayfly or a drake or whatever. So those two guys, were kind of at odds as the story goes in England, but finally they came together, Halford and Skews, and they had a discussion at Houghton, which is there in Stockbridge at the fishing club, and then they came together, had an understanding, and then Halford extended the piece, I guess, to him and said, "Hey, let's join the London Fish Club together," which they did, a very exclusive club, thus creating what we know as fly fishing today. You got dry fly fishing, you got wet fly fishing, you got various ways to fish. And I look at leadership kind of that way. When you're in charge of a team, you have different personalities and people that have been elevated to leadership because of their skills and their opportunities, and you got to treat them that way. But you have to create that environment of collaboration, understanding, but also knowing their world too, so you'll know it. So all of you can make the uniform decision to make it work and create that environment. And I think that's what it boils down to, that everybody, you don't run around trying to put fires out every single day. You have to sometimes, but sometimes you create another fire by putting too many fires out. But having that process and that approach of just understanding collaboration and also working together to get, the sum of what you're trying to accomplish.
You articulate that so incredibly well. Yeah, I've read a lot of John Childress and, the overlap of fly fishing and leadership. And, he talks about the leader that, has one approach, one game plan, do what I tell you to do. If you don't like it, tough luck, kind of the military approach to leadership. And, in reading some of his works, it's like, the approach floating the Bighorn River. I probably spent 250, 300 days on the Bighorn River. And, every run, every riffle, every deep run, every cut bank is different, and it's just like in leadership, to deal with person X versus person Y versus person A or B, it's different. It's different. You've got to read the situation. You've got to have different approaches, different strategies. And I think that correlates so closely to fly fishing because the brownie you're casting at a, you know, mayfly hatch off the riffles is a completely different approach strategy than a rainbow lying in slow, deep water a mile downstream. There's no similarity. To be successful in one has nothing to do with being successful with, fish number 2 or 3 or 4. So I think there's just tremendous power and energy between that correlation.
And you're right. I mean, and I think that's what draws us to this sport. It's that constant changing of approach and figuring it out. Problem solving is one of my favorite things to do, and getting out on a stream. And the thing I did learn in England that I've taken with me is observation, imitation, and presentation. And it's three things that when I my first trip over there, I went out on my own to a stream and fish. But then the next day I fished with the gentleman that Robert Preston with Fishing Breaks, a guy that grew up in Austria that's guided a very long time in England. He introduced me to the Clean-Timer, which it changed my life. That's a wonderful fly and serves a great purpose. But I remember with Robert, we started the day with a warm cup of tea, and then we walked the whole beat that day, that stream that we were fishing, and we looked and we kind of took in everything that was going on and figuring out, where the fish positioned, what bugs were they eating during the day, what insects are rising. And so we went back and started tackling it. And I think that's like, anything to your point that we do in leadership or we do in business or we do in life, raising a family. But, you've got to look at it from that. Instead of being so bogged down in the forest, you can't see for the trees, you got to get above that and figure that all out. And the problem solving of fly fishing is the piece that I really enjoy. I mean, I know this sounds crazy. I love to catch fish. I love to hook fish. But one of the things that I like about this sport, some days you go out on the water and you're just killing it. But some days you go out and it reminds me of Escataba stream and our farms on their stream in Virginia. Their days I've gone out there and I go an hour and I don't have any bites. I don't have any luck. I fished this spot before. I was catching fish. And so I have to sit there and figure things out, continue to observe, continue to evaluate my position in the stream. Am I too high in the water? Do I need to get down on my knees and make my cast? Do I need to get next to a tree so the fish won't see me and be unseen by the fish? But those are the things that I enjoy the most. But then the reward of that is when you do catch a fish, no matter the size of that fish, you've kind of won that game. You've completed that process. And so that's the piece that I enjoy the most. And it kind of reminds me, being an Alabama graduate, our heart was broken when Nick Saban left the school as our head football coach. But the one thing that Saban taught a lot of people during his years of coaching was that, as a football team, you focus on your assignment. You get as good at that assignment that you can be. You work, and he called it the process. You work that footwork, that blocking position, that pass route, the quarterback, the running back, they do their job. You worry about what you do individually, and then that scoreboard is going to reflect the success you have on the fundamentals of the game. And I think that applies to fly fishing, and you got to treat this like a sport to enjoy it. Don't get me wrong, but I think those are the things that keep us coming back along, like we've talked about the relationships that really make this sport something that one that if you really get into what we've talked about so far this morning, Mark, something that you enjoy and you keep going back.
That is so awesome. John, you are incredibly articulate. I could not have enjoyed this conversation more. This was just fantastic.
Well, thanks for reaching out, Mark. It really meant a lot to me that you would consider me for your podcast. And it's funny. I've never been a big user of LinkedIn. I'm kind of on and off on LinkedIn, and now that I'm retired and I went all these years having that account, and I never had it as an app on my phone. And now that I don't have 50,000 emails coming in a day, I thought, well, what else can I look at in the mornings when I drink my coffee? And then just out of the blue, we connected, and I loved it.